Most people don't necessarily die because they have a recessive gene. Only when that individual connects with another individual who carries the same genetic code could their offspring be at risk. Both recessive copies and a recessive disorder are possible outcomes for them. Those occurrences are rather uncommon in a gene pool that is comparatively large and diverse. However, if a person is limited to choosing a mate solely from their family, that likelihood may begin to increase significantly as subsequent generations gather nearly identical or identical genetic code, a condition called homozygosity. Geographic isolation, social constraints, or infrequent but severe instances of abuse are just a few of the numerous reasons why inbreeding may occur. Some groups might just wish to stick to tried-and-true customs, marrying members of similar social classes who eventually tend to become related. Because family members aren't particularly interested in sharing their absurd levels of wealth and power with outsiders, royal dynasties have historically been particularly prone to inbreeding. Hooking up with ordinary people can be made even less appealing by social beliefs, such as the idea that some people are unique or even divine. After all, why would a demigod use mortal genes to weaken their lineage? All of this indicates that a small percentage of people have experienced severe inbreeding throughout history. While some are painful examples of why inbreeding is so frequently viewed as taboo, others manage to avoid the worst consequences of their tangled family tree. The dead pharaoh Tutankhamun would not have been depicted exactly as he had been in life, even though ancient Egyptian artists weren't scared of realism. His golden death mask symmetrical, shimmering glory concealed a human being who was probably severely inbred and suffered as a result. What was going on with Tutankhamun? CT scans of his mummy revealed that the young king, who passed away at the age of 19, was juggling a lot of things, according to a 2010 study that was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. Initially, he had a broken leg and an active case of malaria, which might have been the direct causes of his demise. In addition to having a clubbed foot that would have made walking challenging, he was also managing cleft palate and scoliosis. A degenerative disease that was destroying the bones in his left foot made this even worse. It's difficult to determine whether Tut's problems were all caused by his inbreeding. As is the case with so many historical and ancient figures, he was most likely the result of royal inbreeding. The study did confirm. Akhenaten, the pharaoh who was thought to be his father, did wed one of his sisters. Tut was buried with 2 miscarried fetuses and had no heir, which may have been explained by the fact that he was also married to his own sister or half-sister. The royals of ancient Ireland, like those of so many other kingdoms throughout human history, were not particularly interested in distributing their wealth to outsiders. That is, at least, the only plausible explanation for the genetic makeup of one man interred in the magnificent Neolithic Irish tomb known as Newgrange. The person in question was discovered in a particularly opulent area of the stone tomb, which was already thought to have been reserved for the period's elites, according to a 2020 study published in Nature. This man's unique genetic code was extremely closely knit, according to researchers who examined the genomes of over 40 people who had been interred in and around Newgrange. More precisely, they discovered that first-degree incest was required to produce him. He was most likely the offspring of a parent-child or sibling relationship. His ties to the local elite more than 5,000 years ago were further demonstrated by researchers who discovered that he was related to other people buried nearby. The DNA is difficult to deny, but there isn't much written evidence to support this assertion. This is also supported by circumstantial evidence that suggests this practice was limited to the highest levels of Stone Age Irish society. After all, poor farmers were not being buried in a fancy tomb. Therefore, it might be reminiscent of similar circumstances in other ancient societies, such as the Egyptian pharaoh's courts and the early Hawaiian royal courts. Poor Charles II of Spain is the unfortunate poster child for inbred royals. His birth into the Habsburg dynasty, which by the time of his 1661 birth was infamously inbred because the Habsburgs couldn't bear to dilute their wealth and power by marrying outsiders, was obviously not his fault. The situation became so complicated that Charles's grandmother served as both his aunt and his niece. Charles suffered from a startling array of issues, including early-onset baldness that became apparent by his mid-30s, developmental delays, epilepsy, and physical deformities such as the sharply protruding Habsburg jaw that was typical of his family. He died at the age of 38, and in his autopsy, doctors reported that he had only one blackened testicle, severely damaged internal organs, and a heart so tiny it was the size of a peppercorn. It's obvious that Charles had been dealt a terrible genetic hand, even though some of the details seem over the top. The fact that Charles was unable to have children was perhaps the most detrimental to him and the Habsburg family as a whole. Though contemporary researchers have proposed genetic kidney disorders, enzymatic problems, and a malfunctioning pituitary gland as the cause, the disorders underlying all of this are still unknown. In any case, the highly inbred Habsburg dynasty in Spain came to an end when Charles failed to continue the line. Nearly everyone in early Hawaiian culture was subject to a highly hierarchical way of life. Kanahiki were in the middle, and many were makarainana, or simple commoners. At the top of the social pyramid were a small group of people known as the alii, who could be further subdivided into even lower-ranked groups. The highest-ranking chiefs would expect most people to throw themselves face down in front of the alii because of a complex system of social rules called kapu, which demanded such respect for them. Although royals abolished the system in the early 19th century, breaking kapu could mean death. But prior to that radical shift, the alii had very few options when it came to choosing a spouse. Getting married to a first-degree relative was the answer, at least in ancient Hawaii. Children born from these unions were regarded as particularly high-ranking, and the practice was once revered and seen as a sign of the highest status. However, the practice completely appalled European settlers on the islands. By the 1820s, King Kamehameha III and his sister, Nahianina, found themselves in a difficult situation. According to reports, the two were very close and made an attempt to get married, but Nahianina was eventually convinced to marry someone else because she was torn between her desire to embrace the new Christianity brought by missionaries and her traditional ways. She allegedly still had a child with her brother, but the boy passed away soon after birth. Nahianina herself passed away at the age of 20. England's Queen Victoria appeared to be in good health, but her descendants weren't quite so fortunate. Victoria had the gene for hemophilia, a recessive condition that causes blood to clot improperly and puts victims at risk of dying from bleeding. Due to its association with the X chromosome, inheritors who have XY chromosomes are particularly vulnerable because they lack an additional X chromosome that could carry a dominant gene to offset the recessive one. Leopold, Victoria's own son, passed away at the age of 30 from hemophilia. Though Leopold was the first of Victoria's descendants known to have hemophilia, he was very definitely not the last thanks to the limited gene pool of European royals. Victoria's granddaughter Victoria Eugenie brought the gene to Spain, while 3 grandsons died of the disease. Victoria's other granddaughter Alexandra carried it all the way to Russia, and her only son, Crown Prince Alexei, that offered an opening for the notorious mystic Rasputin to work his way into the graces of the imperial family after he supposedly helped Alexei. Few people knew why Rasputin seemed to have such power over Alexandra and her family because the royals concealed the heir's genetic condition. According to reports, this caused further instability, which culminated in the assassination of the Romanovs in 1918, the murder of Rasputin, and the takeover of a newly communist Russia by Lenin and associates. Was it only Victoria's hemophilia gene, which had been exacerbated by decades of inbreeding? No, but it also undoubtedly made matters worse. The pressure to choose a spouse from a suitable and closely related family was too great for many European royals to ignore. Another European dynasty with a rather ingrown family tree was the German house of Wittelsbach. Wittelsbachs had some strange habits, such as mental illness that was thought to be inherited and that affected several family members, but few could truly compare to the evident problems of Habsburgs like Charles II of Spain. Ludwig II, who governed Bavaria from 1864 to 1886, was perhaps the most dramatic. He spent a lot of money on ostentatious construction projects and was generally disinterested in government. His most well-known creation is the Neuschwanstein Castle, which is based on Ludwig's romanticized love of fairy tales and revisionist history and is strikingly situated atop a mountain ridge. Even though the castle was never fully completed, this and other construction projects were viewed as a sign of Ludwig's shaky grasp on reality. The fact that he had turned into a bit of a recluse by the 1880s and was deemed insane and unfit to rule on June 10, 1886, did not help either. He drowned in a lake close to one of his ornate residences 3 days later. Some claimed that the politically awkward Mad King was murdered, while others maintained that it was an accident and accepted the official suicide verdict. Some inbred royals may have managed to go unnoticed, but others were apparently so influenced by their ancestry that just by their appearance, one could tell something wasn't quite right. One such individual was Austria's Emperor Ferdinand I. His parents were Maria Theresa of Naples and Sicily and Francis II, Holy Roman Emperor, also called Francis I of Austria, who were born in 1793. Additionally, the married couple shared all grandparents and were double first cousins. Again, genetic testing was non-existent in the late 18th century, but that cousin marriage might account for Ferdinand's lifetime struggles with hydrocephalus, high fluid levels around the brain, speech problems, and seizures. According to some accounts, he also suffered from a cognitive disability. If the emperor's portraits are any indication, the hydrocephalus also gave him a remarkably large head. Even during his 1831 wedding to his distant cousin Maria Anna of Piedmont, Sardinia, poor Ferdinand is reported to have suffered a seizure. At least Ferdinand was a kind and reasonably well-liked emperor until political turmoil forced him to abdicate in December 1848, even though the two never had children. If his alleged problems were genetic, they had little effect on his longevity. Ferdinand passed away in 1875 at the age of 82.